Tom took it upon himself to fix the way that the horrible bureaucracies of New York deal with children in the foster care system. This has a huge impact on kids, absolutely massive. And it's the kind of thing that when you think about how to fix that, you may look at the problem and say, that is impossible, no one could fix that. Tom is a person who looks at seemingly impossible problems, seemingly insurmountable challenges that really have the potential to help people, and he does not stop, he doesn't give up, and he works on it. Further, he joined Brooklyn Ethical 21 years ago in 2005. And as board chair, he helped with a financial crisis that our organization was facing. He put a ton of effort into the process of helping sell the meeting house that gave us our endowment that keeps us going today. He's now also chairing the American Ethical Union's Ethical Action Committee. And through that work at the AEU, he's put together this platform. So the platform we're discussing has a scope of impact that's beyond just our society, but we get to hear it first and we get to comment on it. So it's just my deep, deep honor to introduce Tom. Thank you, Tom.
Hey, thank you, Bill. Hopefully connecting my laptop will not also be an insurmountable problem. Okay. And, all right, make sure I'm connected to Zoom here.
Pat, can you let Tom share? And if you go to Zoom, are you on the Zoom already?
Yeah, so I should
Okay.
be all right. I was able to do that before.
So are you able to share from within the Zoom?
I have been able to before, so
Okay, good. You just click that there.
yeah,
And kill
get rid
that.
of this. Okay, and then share. Yeah,
Beautiful.
okay, now let's minimize this, go to this, slideshow. Okay, that's all right. Okay, great, you can see this, excellent. All right, appreciate it. Thank you all for joining me today on this beautiful April afternoon. So to start, ethical culture was founded 150 years ago as a set of ideas, deed over creed, eliciting the best in others, etc., coupled with initiation of social programs like settlement houses, the visiting nurse service, and the NAACP. Ethical culture didn't just speak about values, it built institutions. The question for us is, what institutions or policy frameworks should we be building helping to build today in the United States as it is with all of its challenges? The core of this effort must be a careful and structured articulation of what we in Brooklyn Ethical and throughout ethical culture stand for. Fortunately, we probably have a consensus on what we believe in. If we went around the room, we'd probably get very similar answers to the questions about what we should do about healthcare, climate, guns, taxes, and other issues. So our challenge then is not discovery, it is clarity and then commitment. So to that end, we have reestablished the AEU Ethical Action Committee, which I chair. We have drafted a set of positions on 12 key issues that we hope can serve as a broad policy framework for ethical culture. So I offer those today for your consideration. And by the way, I will be presenting this to other societies and also to the Assembly for ethical culture later in the year. So let me move along here. Okay, so we put together something we're calling the Ethical Action Agenda, and its structure is this. So for each of 12 areas, we've developed issues, recommendations, and what we call an advocacy tracker, and I'll show you an example of that in a little bit. This year, we're focusing on domestic policy. Foreign policy is important, but deserves its own treatment, ideally next year, but no guarantees on that. I'm supported by a wonderful ethical action committee that also includes Lajira Cooper from Brooklyn, David Vassar, the New York Society, Ken Novak, the Chicago Circle, Fred Bright from the Triangle, and Greg Bonin, the AEU Development Director, and we're also using this as an opportunity to recruit additional members for the committee. So we propose that the AEU adopt the following positions. I hope you guys like numbers. Vote equality. Our guiding democratic principle is one person, one vote, but we're falling short of this goal. The Electoral College distorts representation. A Wyoming voter has 3 to 4 times the influence of a California voter. Remember, the Electoral College is the number of senators plus the number of representatives. Since Citizens United, campaign spending has exceeded $15 billion, with outsized influence from wealthy donors and super PACs. With extreme gerrymandering, a party with 40% of the vote can win a dominant majority of seats, undermining majority rule. And you see all the competition that occurs with regard to gerrymandering. So, in the name of vote equality, we're recommending the following. Strengthen American democracy by overturning or circumventing Citizens United, reforming or replacing the Electoral College, ending gerrymandering, ensuring that states and not the federal government manage the election process, and ensuring the right of every citizen to vote, regardless of race, religion, or ID. So here's the advocacy tracker I was referring to earlier. So it'll be updated by our committee and shared with local societies. This is a draft. Every issue will have its own tracker. So for example, if you look in the middle of the chart, under Campaign Finance Citizens United, there's this specific reform called the Montana Plan, the idea being you don't have to wait for the Supreme Court to die off and get a new Supreme Court. You can simply go ahead and have at the state level a decision by the state to limit what corporations can do in terms of the voting participation and electoral participation. So they have a group called Transparent Elections that's working on that hopefully we can go and partner with. And our potential role for Brooklyn Ethical and for the AEU is to help promote transparency in that process and maybe work with that group. So you see everyone there, you see the color coding for the status so you can know what's moving along. This is a way of actually structuring what it is that we do in the advocacy area. Fair taxation. The top federal corporate income tax rate declined from 52.8% in 1968 to 21% today, and it's less than 10% after deductions like depreciation. Workers today pay on average a 14% income tax rate. So what that means is that workers are paying a higher level of taxation than corporations in this country now. After the 2017 tax cut, corporate tax revenues fell about 30% in 2018. While worker wage gains were modest, corporate taxes used to provide funding at 4% of the gross domestic product. That's a measure of the overall economic scope of the U.S. economy. Currently, that rate is 1.8%. This adds hundreds of billions of dollars to the deficit. Corporations can also shift profits to Ireland that have a 12.5% or Bermuda 0% to minimize taxes. Then secondly, the merely rich pay 23.8% capital gains tax. The ultra rich often avoid it by borrowing against assets, paying 7% on their credit line. So let's say Elon Musk wants to go ahead and buy another house. He doesn't have to go ahead and sell any Tesla stock. He just simply borrows against a credit line, pays the 7% in that, and pay no tax whatsoever in the course of that transaction. Also, and thanks Jeremy for the reminder on this, investment fund managers are paid for the services as though they were capital gains, which is at a 23.8%, and they something called carried interest instead of as taxable income, which would be at a 37% rate. So our recommendations are increase the corporate income tax rate, ensure the wealthiest Americans pay their fair share through reforms to corporate capital gains, estate, that's another discussion, carried interest and trust taxation. Limit offshoring of corporate profits to avoid taxation, pursue phased-in wealth taxes, ideally coordinated globally, and add IRS staff, and my apologies to the War Resisters League. Investments in the IRS result in a 10% return to the Treasury. A fair economy. About 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. The federal minimum wage remains $7.25, well below its inflation-adjusted 1968 level. State minimum wages are not living wages. In New York City, the minimum wage is $16, well below the living wage of $30 to $32 for a single adult, but the New York City wage is increasing, unlike in many parts of the country. Union membership is now 10%, down from 20% in 1983. 70 to 75% of U.S. workers do not have access to parental leave. In the G6, and by G6 we mean the United States, Canada, Great Britain, France, Germany, and Japan. I got them. 90 to 100% of workers are eligible for paid family leave by law. Recommendations. We should support a living wage, the right to unionize, expansion and funding of worker ownership, safe workplaces, expanded child care and parental leave, and policies advancing equity and opportunity. Universal health care. By the way, there'll be an opportunity for questions and comments at the end of this, and I appreciate your patience on this. U.S. health care costs about $14,775 per person versus an average of $78.60 in peer G6 countries. All G6 countries except the United States have universal health coverage systems. The U.S. is the only G6 country where people go bankrupt due to medical debt. What's the outcome of this? Well, life expectancy is 78.4 years in the U.S. versus 82.5 years in the peer nations, the G6, the rest of the G6. Another point on health care, after Dobbs, abortion is banned or heavily restricted in 15 to 20 states. Over 35% of U.S. women of reproductive age live in states with significant restrictions. And I'm sure there are lots of other health care issues that could be added, but we're starting with these. Recommendations. Implement universal health care, drawing on G6 and other models that achieve better outcomes at roughly half the cost. Use the buying power of the federal government to reduce medication costs. Ensure equitable nationwide access to reproductive health care by protecting legal rights, expanding provider availability, and reducing cost barriers. Climate action. CO2, carbon dioxide, has risen from 280 parts per million to 423 parts per million since the industrial era, the 1800s. Global temperature is up about 1.5 degrees Celsius, it's about 2 degrees Fahrenheit, with warming accelerating threefold since 1982. Wind and solar are now cost competitive, from $37 to $86 per megawatt hour versus $48 to $107 per megawatt hour for gas. So we're not just talking about a progressive thing. Changes in technology are such that renewables are now more cost effective than fossil fuels. And then also the U.S. exited the Paris Climate Agreement in 2026. The Paris Climate Agreement requires participants to go ahead and plan to go ahead and address climate change and global warming. Recommendations. Expand renewable energy and reduce reliance on fossil fuels to address global warming. And then re-sign the Paris Climate Agreement requiring planning to address global warming. Responsible gun policy. In 2023, 46,728 Americans died from gun-related injuries, with 659 mass shootings. And there are various definitions of mass shootings that enter into this. Canada has had 289 firearm homicides and 1 or 2 mass shootings, depending on how you count it. Australia had 27 deaths and 0 mass shootings. Of course, they had a mass shooting fairly recently. Recommendations. Reduce gun violence by banning high-capacity weapons and requiring universal gun registration. Quality education. In 2024, 31% of fourth graders read proficiently at grade level, and 39% are at grade level in math. In New York City, nearly 450,000 children, 27%, live below the poverty line. Poverty has measurable impacts on child development and education. Our education system is challenged by historic racism that today affects child performance and opportunity. Recommendations. Invest in public education so every child achieves basic skills, educators are supported, and performance data drives improvement, and expand adult education, especially in technology and financial literacy. Responsible government. Senior government administrators, are often not qualified for their jobs. I think we've discovered that. Policy instability, weak data systems, and weak support for, and often opposition to, data and expertise reduce the quality of government programs. For example, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Health and Human Services, and the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. The budget process is not thoughtful and results in arbitrary budget cuts. The executive and legislative branches and U.S. political parties do not work together collaboratively and transparently. Responsible government recommendations. Implement minimum qualifications for senior political appointees and government committee members. Improve the quality of government by implementing the proposals to overturn Citizens United, the Electoral College, and gerrymandering, and support and actively encourage technology and expertise in government. Immigration reform. U.S. birth rates have declined to 1.6 per woman, well below replacement. It's 2.1. In other words, you would have to have 2.1 births per woman to go ahead and, over the long term, replace the population. That's down to 1.6 now in the U.S. It's declined worldwide as well. About 10 to 11 million undocumented immigrants, 3% of our population, contribute to key sectors including construction and agriculture, but are pursued as criminals. Immigrants commit less crime than native-born Americans. By law, a maximum of 7% of our immigrants can come from any one country. This is an outdated standard. Deportations do not follow due process, divide families, are often unnecessarily cruel, and are badly administered. Recommendations. Increase and realign quotas to reflect lower birth rates, labor demands, and different countries of origination. Expand work visas. Ensure due process. Provide pathways to legal status, and treat immigrants with respect while managing our borders. Affordable housing issues. The U.S. faces a housing shortage of roughly 3 to 5 million units. For extremely low-income renters, the gap exceeds 7 million affordable units. Over 30% of U.S. households spend more than 30% of their income on housing. Recommendations. Expand supply, target affordability, and protect tenants. First, build more housing, the supply side. Reform zoning, the approval process and regulation. Innovate, including building prefabricated units. Expand the low-income housing tax credit and increase housing choice vouchers. Plan for emerging technology. Issues. 1/4 of computer programming jobs disappeared in 2023 and 2024. The jobs most at risk, say government forecasters and economists, are administrative and office support staff, sales, and low-level computer programmers, all roles with salaries from $40,000 to $100,000. AI power is concentrated among a few firms. Recommendations. As the Times says, AI could be designed to increase the value of human expertise by building tools that make workers more capable rather than replacing them outright. But so far, AI is doing the opposite. So we should plan proactively to support workers put at risk by AI, and then recognize that no one has a clear understanding of the benefits and risks of emerging technologies, including AI. Manage the federal debt. Federal debt rose from $35.46 trillion in FY24 to $37.64 trillion in 25, a 6.1% increase versus a 2.3% increase in GDP. Debt is increasing faster than our economy is growing. The burden of federal debt will fall primarily on younger Americans who will service the federal debt and pay higher interest throughout their lives. Recommendations. Reduce the growth of long-term debt through fair taxation, more efficient health care, and targeted spending discipline. Let's start with reviewing the defense budget. The growth of federal debt should not exceed the growth of the U.S. economy. Now, those are the recommendations, but I think it's important to talk about this in the context of racism. So all the issues we identified disproportionately affect persons of color. White households have a median wealth of about $280,000. For black households, it's about $44,000. The African American poverty rate is 18.4%. The white non-Hispanic poverty rate is 7.6%. Persons of color face a disproportionate set of voting rights challenges, including voter ID laws, voter roll purges, polling place closures, felony disenfranchisement, and gerrymandering. In health insurance, 10% of African Americans run uninsured versus 5 to 6% for non-Hispanic whites. For fourth graders at or above proficient, the white students, the rate there is 40%, African American students, 20%. 78% of economists agree that black-white economic differences are in large part due to discriminatory norms and institutions. By the way, we have a pretty large biography in support of all of this that I'll make available to people to take a look at. Recommendations. The social justice recommendations we've made will help address disparities between white and families of color. But racism is a continuing reality in America that must be fought. Accordingly, the EU supports justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, JEDI initiatives, even when politically contested, targeted education and housing policies to expand opportunity and reduce segregation, equitable access to jobs, capital, and wealth building, criminal justice reform, and voting right protections. We also support evidence-based efforts to address the legacy of enslavement and systematic discrimination. Okay, so why should the AEU and Brooklyn Ethical adopt this ethical action agenda? So ethical principles and practical solutions have been part of ethical culture from the start. The Democratic, Republican, and other party platforms, which I've read, are generally only updated each presidential election, and there's no guarantee they'll reflect our views. AEU assemblies have passed position statements. Go to AEU.org, take a look at them. But there are a few of them, they overlap, there are gaps, and they are not referred to in subsequent years. A regularly updated, broad-based set of positions linked to advocacy movements is a better approach. What do other movements do? We have no problem taking a look at what everyone else has done in this area. Our approach with the Ethical Action Agenda and the Advocacy Tracker is somewhat different from that of other organizations. The Unitarian Universalists have two processes. One is a highly participatory and thoughtful 3-year single-issue study process called CSAI, Congregational Study Action Issues. For example, they had a 3-year process for taking a look at inequality. Okay, very, very thoughtful, interesting, but just covered one topic. And an active campaign called Side with Love that links to individual demonstrations. So they've had demonstrations in support of LGBTQ+ and other topics, but their work is not organized into a single systematic framework across policy areas like our ethical action agenda, and there are gaps. The Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism provides one of the strongest models of value-based advocacy, grounding its positions in the ethical teachings of the Torah and a long-standing tradition of social justice engagement. Many of their positions align with ours, but there are gaps. So, like the Torah, their work requires more study. The American Humanist Association is a strong ally of ours on numerous issues, especially those regarding separation of church and state, but they're interested in economic justice, healthcare, climate, and other issues as well. They might be interested, I hope they are, in our ethical action agenda and our advocacy tracker. We should reach out to them first. But let's make sure we're all on the same page first before we do that. Why is the ethical action agenda good for ethical societies like Brooklyn Ethical? The ethical action agenda offers a clear set of positions grounded in data and tied to action. The agenda articulates principles. One person, one vote, carbon dioxide raises global temperature, G6 health cost parity, etc., in a range of areas, and advocates policies to address social problems, structural problems. And it gives visitors and prospective members a clearer idea of who we are. This will help member development. Also, it provides clear opportunities for members to participate in advocacy. Continuing with that, it identifies advocates who can offer relevant platforms and become our allies. It provides a valuable AEU service that allows each society to benefit from the talents and perspectives of our partner societies. People asking, what is the AEU doing? Well, this is one thing the AEU is doing. And gives Brooklyn Ethical and the AEU an opportunity to shape current policy. We can, for example, send the ethical action agenda to elected officials and candidates to get their replies to our positions. So The policy approval process. Policy statements must be approved by 2 clergy leaders, and those have been named by the NLC. Those are Randy Best, who presented here a couple weeks ago, and Louise Jett, who gave her class on ethical action and ethical culture. And the ethical action agenda will be presented at the AU Assembly and to selected societies in coming months. Questions? Thank you. Thank you.